Okay, I think we will get started. So thank you all for coming, and thanks to Dynamicweb for having me here. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm happy to see all of you guys. And I know that all of you guys are extremely excited about seeing about what you're about to see, right? I know many of you haven't slept tonight because you were so excited to see this, right? And I know that all of you know that ASP.NET is going to be the big revolution of ASP.NET as we know it today. Okay? Yeah, is that right? Yeah? Yeah? Oh, yeah, okay. We'll see. So my name is Sebastian. I work as a tech evangelist for Microsoft. I'm responsible for the evangelism efforts that we do in Denmark on app development and web development. I've got more than 10 years of experience with ASP and IIS, going back all the way to the good old days with classic ASP. And I sort of have a secret affair with Azure. And actually, I think we will be taking a look at Azure later on towards the end of this session. I'm sort of active on Twitter. I try to be. You can follow me there if you're interested. My handle is Sebastian BK, and I also have a blog where I upload all sorts of stuff and write about different things, and the address is sebastianbrandes.com. But let's get to it. So today we'll be speaking of ASP.NET, and before jumping into what the future is going to be, I think we'll just take a step back and actually take a look at the history of ASP.NET. Where did it come from? What is it that we have today? And from there, we'll take a look into the future. We'll talk about the objectives of ASP.NET 5. Why is it that we need this big revolution that I'm talking about? And then we'll take a look at the new version of Visual Studio. There's a community preview out right now that you can go and download. And I'll take exactly the same community preview. So I'm not using any secret build that we have internally in Microsoft. I'm just using public tools. We'll actually get started building an ASP.NET 5 application inside of Visual Studio 2015. We'll talk about the .NET Core CLR. Does this ring a bell to anybody? Yeah. One person. Good. Two persons. Three. Okay. Anyway, I think after this session, all of you should have at least some idea of what it is. I'll speak about some command line tools that you might not be used to using. In fact, if you haven't worked with ASP.NET 5, it's very unlikely that you've used these tools. We'll take a look at those. And then with these tools, we'll run an ASP.NET 5 application on Linux. Okay? Ooh, some laughs around, okay? Yeah. And then in the end, we'll wrap it all up. So let's take a look at the history. Back in 1996, we had this, we published this great technology called ASP, or also known as Classic ASP. Do we have any Classic ASP developers in the room? Yeah, we do. Yeah. A lot of old people. Then in 2002, ASP.NET came out, and 6 years later, MVC came out. So we already see some sort of a pattern here, right? Every 6 years, something big is happening. Last year, ASP.NET 5 was announced. So you see, we follow this sort of a 6-year pattern. In the meantime, we had web pages, we had Web API and SignalR. And then last year, we announced that we were going to work on vNext. We published the first alpha builds of ASP.NET vNext, or also known as ASP.NET 5. And you know, we sort of have a 6-year pattern going on, right? And so we have 6 years between Classic ASP and ASP.NET, then another 6 years, and then another 6 years. So I'm kind of anticipating that we as Microsoft are going to do something really crazy in 6 years. And I think that's going to be an Azure data center on the planet Mars. Let's see what will happen. Okay. So ASP.NET, the future of .NET on the server. ASP.NET is a flexible and cross-platform runtime environment, and we will see tons of examples on that. It has a very modular HTTP request pipeline. Okay, If you don't know what this means, you will know what it means in a little while. Just a quick question: is everybody in here familiar with the Open Web Interface for .NET, OWIN? Okay, a few people. I think we'll look into that as well. It's built to be cloud ready, and what does that mean? Well, it means that we're trying to separate the ASP.NET application itself from the underlying server that it runs on. So we try to take that application, make it sort of a modular thing that we can put onto any sort of server anywhere in the cloud. We'll look at examples of that. It's a unified web framework. Also, we'll have examples of that. And it supports this very agile development with the tools of your choice. So you're no longer bound to have Visual Studio installed on some Windows machine. And I see some people using Macs here, and I bet you're running virtual machines on your Macs, right? Well, okay, maybe not you, but somebody else might. So a lot of .NET developers that are Mac users, they typically have virtual machines installed. That's no longer a requirement if you want to develop ASP.NET applications. And then the whole thing is open source. It's actually already open source, so you can go to github.com and check it out already. This cross-platform thing, let me just dive a little more into that. So you know the .NET framework as it is today, right? This full fat thing that includes tons of different stuff that enable you guys to develop awesome applications. And it is a great framework, and it enables us to do a bunch of cool things, but also it's a little big. And if the only thing that we want to do is develop the web applications using ASP.NET, then we might not want to be bound to this full fat .NET framework. We might be okay with having a smaller version of the framework that's more lightweight and that runs a little faster. And to fulfill that need or that purpose, the .NET team has made a sort of a version of the .NET framework called .NET Core, which is a lot smaller, a lot more agile, and a lot more modular than the full .NET framework. Also, ASP.NET will run on Mono. In fact, the ASP.NET teams working on ASP.NET right now, they have the Mono runtime environment as a part of their test stack. So everything that they built for ASP.NET 5 will run on Mono on Linux and Mac. There's a much better dependency management system. I'm not going to talk too much about it here because I'll give you great examples of this with code. We have this integrated runtime compilation with Roslyn. And is everybody familiar with Roslyn in here? Has anybody heard of Roslyn? Okay, so Roslyn is this new compiler that we have for the .NET platform, specifically for C# and for Visual Basic. It replaces the current compiler that sits inside of Visual Studio 2013. And for a long time, it's been going on for years, they tried to replace what's there already with a much more modular API-friendly compiler. And that is now the standard compiler in Visual Studio 2015. For a long time, it was called Project Roslyn. It was sort of a cool name, but they changed it to a slightly more boring name, the .NET Compiler Platform. So that is now the official name, and it's open source on GitHub. It brings a lot of cool features to us as web developers, and also I'll show examples of that. Great. So not the slide before, but the one before that, it said something about a unified web framework, right? And currently we have sort of these three silos in ASP.NET 4. We have web pages, web API, and MVC. And there are some things that these silos sort of share. So web pages and MVC, they share the Razor syntax, the stuff we just saw, or the people that were in this room. But they have their own separate HTML helpers. Likewise, we have something called controllers in MVC, as well as in Web API, but they have nothing to do with each other from sort of how they're implemented. They're two different things. Also, the actions, well, there's actions in MVC and actions in Web API. They're two different things. filters, model binding, and dependency injection. So we have these same concepts, but in 2 different code bases. So we sort of had this one framework, but it's really supported by many different code bases. And that's the sort of revolution we're bringing up, or that's the thing we want to revolutionize, right? We want to bring it all down to one ASP.NET stack. So ASP.NET 5, in its essence, is MVC, Web API, and web pages bundled together to ASP.NET MVC 6. Okay, so we have ASP.NET 5, the platform, and then ASP.NET MVC 6, which is the MVC framework. Some of the objectives of ASP.NET vNext or 5 is that we want to make it modular. We want to have a faster development cycle. We want to have this seamless transition from on-premises to the cloud. We want to allow you guys to choose the editors and tools that you want to use. It's all open source, it's all cross-platform, and it's all a lot faster than it is today. And the reason why it is a lot faster is that it does not depend on this full framework that can slow things down. And related to this full framework, we have the issue with this full framework is really that the ASP.NET stack today depends on this monster namespace that's just everywhere. And I want you guys to sort of like prepare yourselves for the next slide, because it might actually scare you a little bit, okay? So we have this monster, the SystemWeb, okay? Are you all familiar with SystemWeb? It's a huge namespace that includes tons of different stuff that's actually really helpful for us developers, but it's so coupled, or it's so tightly coupled together with the .NET framework that it's hard to rip apart, and that just leaves us with a situation where we're stuck with that full fat framework. That's what we want to get away from. When we announced that we were gonna open source .NET and run on different platforms and all that, it's sort of like a lot of media picked it up and thought it was kind of crazy that Microsoft was gonna do this. On Hacker News, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 articles in the top 10 about this thing. We also announced a Docker image, and yeah, it was just, I think people in the community were really surprised about what we did, because it was sort of like Microsoft did an anti-Microsoft thing or something like that. Well, yeah, but enough talk, let's just move right into it. So I'll open my Visual Studio 2015 here. Let's just open a new instance. And as I said before, you can go ahead and download this on your own. The website is asp.net/vnext. And I believe the latest version of the community tech preview is 6. So you can go ahead and download that. It pretty much looks like what we're used to, except for the fact that we now have a few new project templates, and we're going to use one of those. I'm in here under the C# node, and I'm in here in the web folder for templates. And usually, or at least in Visual Studio 2013, we only have this one, but now we have 2 more. So we can do an ASP.NET class library and an ASP.NET console application. So how do they differ from regular class libraries and console applications? I'm actually going to answer that question a little later, but for now, let's just start up a new web application. And we can call this DWTC demo. We get this same dialog box, or this dialog window, and I'm pretty sure that most of you are familiar with this, and especially the first 6 templates here. But these 2 are new, and we can either create an ASP.NET 5 empty application or a starter web here, which includes some more stuff. But take a look at these checkboxes down here for Web Forms MVC and Web API. Up here for an ASP.NET 4 application, we can choose what we want to add, but we don't have that option here. And why don't we? Well, because these things have merged into one now, right? So there's no reason why I would say, oh, I need both MVC and Web API, because that's sort of implicit, right? So that's a difference here in this window. Let's just go ahead and open up a new empty project, which will not contain a lot, but the project structure is a little different, and I think it's important to take a look at that. I think I actually have a zoom tool, don't I? Yeah. So we can zoom into. Good. Is this a little bigger? Good. So the structure of this project is a little different from what we're used to, but honestly, well, it's kind of the same, but not, right? So we have this source folder first of all, and it sort of follows a convention that that the open source community at least is taking upon, and that's putting everything in, all the source into the source folder, and then putting all the build output or the build output into another folder, rather than mixing the two things together, which is the case today. So under this source folder we have our project here, and then we have this thing called www root. Okay, and so what is this thing? Well, it's actually just a folder. So we can right click that and we can open this folder, and we'll see that it's just a folder that sits together with the rest of our stuff in this project. And the idea with this folder and this, well, it has sort of a small globe, but the idea with this folder is we put all our static files in there. Okay, all our images, all our JavaScript, all of our HTML. If we have any static HTML, we will put it in there. Right. All our Razor views, we put it in our views folder, but the static pages or the static files, we put them in there. Secondly, we have this dependencies node, and what is that about? Well, it's not about the dependencies that we would import from NuGet, for example. It's the dependencies that might come from the Node Package Manager, from Bower, or any other package manager system that's not NuGet. Has anybody in here, or is everybody familiar with Node? Yeah, so Node is this runtime for JavaScript servers. Yeah. Well, okay, it has a package manager, and it has a ton of packages that a lot of web developers really like. And we can use Node packages from inside of Visual Studio here. And when we do that, they will show up under this node dependencies. An example would be to run the grunt task runner. Do people know grunt? It's a task runner that runs inside a node. If we were to use that from in here, it would show up under these dependencies. Next up, we have our references, and these references are sort of they are a representation of what's inside of the next item here, the project.json. So there's a big difference in how projects are structured here in ASP.NET 5, because we no longer have a .cs proj file where all of our references are defined. That part is now moved into a separate file called project.json. So everything that we would need here, and in this case, the only thing that we depend on is this library here. But everything that we would need, we would put it in here, and we would get a representation of it over here. So because we depend on Microsoft.asp.net.server.iis, we can see that here, right? Sure. And so, but we also have this other thing, the ASP.NET Core 5, and I think I mentioned that when we were at the slides that I was going to talk a little bit more about this. Here we can state, or actually rather over here in the projects.json file, we can state what kind of runtime environments that we want to target. And if there's anything specific for one of the runtime environments that we want to import, we can do so within these curly brackets here, and then we will only import that dependency when we run on that environment. So we can make it really modular. We're not bound to one framework. We can pick and choose, or we can choose multiple frameworks and then define the dependencies in here. I hope that makes sense. And then finally we have this startup.cs class. Now I asked before if people had heard about OWIN, or the Open Web Interface for .NET, and not a lot of people said they had. It's this community-driven specification that started a few years back, and it was basically a bunch of guys in the .NET community that said, hey, we wanna do stuff. We wanna we want to take the application, the ASP.NET application as we know it today, and define an interface for it to work with a server. So, and with the idea of separating the application a little bit from the underlying server. So the typical case would be ASP.NET as a server and ASP.NET as the application and IIS as the server, right? Because for a long time, those two things have been really tightly coupled together. So the OWIN specification defines a set of interfaces for how applications speak with servers and how servers speak with hosts. And hosts are basically the processes that run the servers. Microsoft, already with the latest version of Visual Studio, we implemented the OWIN specification with the project Cortana. Yeah, well, anyway, the idea is just that we can build something in between our server and our application called middleware. And I'll give an example of that later if we have time for it, because it's not the most important thing. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at the project structure here, let's try and build an MVC app. But now we just started out with an empty project and it doesn't really include anything. So if we want to build an MVC app, we have to add all the bits and pieces that are needed to create an MVC app. And the first thing we need to do is to go into this project.json file and say that we actually want to use the MVC NuGet package. So we can do that by saying ASP.NET or Microsoft.asp.mvc, and we're actually up to beta 3 now, but we'll just use beta 1 here. And right now this file has not been saved, that's why there's a little star up there. But let's just try and see what happens when I click here. So maybe we can do it like this. Take a look at my Solution Explorer when I hit save. So it starts restoring automatically. It goes up to NuGet.org and it tries to find this server or this this assembly or this NuGet package. It downloads it and it puts it into my references file here. Okay, that's what happens when you add dependencies to your project.json. You actually get intelligence here. I think you saw that. And this intelligence comes because we actually have a schema for this type of file. It's located at this URL here. And Visual Studio knows that when we're working with this type of file, based on this schema, it can give us intelligence. So we added this dependency here, and the next thing we need to do is we need to tell our startup class here that we want to use MVC. One of the things that sort of came with OWIN and the implementation of OWIN was this idea of being able to build your own HTTP request pipeline. So when we get a request from the server, we get sort of everything that request contains. We can do stuff with that sort of in the middleware before we pass that request on to our app. That's the idea of middleware, and I'll try to make an example of that here. First of all, I want to specify that I want to use MVC as a service. So I create a method here called configure services. It shall take a iService collection. And I pressed Control dot, and it suggests me to use the Microsoft.framework.dependency injection namespace here. I'll say a few more words about that in a little while, but let's just leave it for now. I'll say that we have this. Yeah, so this method is being called, and we get this services object. And to this services object, we can say we want to add MVC. Down here in the configure method, we can then say, okay, we've added MVC to our stack of services. Now we actually want to go ahead and use MVC. That's what we need to do. Now we can go ahead and create our controllers, our models, and our views. So this should be pretty familiar to everybody who's worked with MVC, right? Nothing new here. I'll create a, let's start out by, whoops, what did I do? Let's start out by creating a class, and let's say that the thing I want to build here is a blog engine. So the basic model or the basic class I need here is a blog post. And let's say that in this blog engine, our blog post will have an ID. Oops, it will have a title, and will have it will have some content. Good. Now let's create a controller. I'll just create an MVC controller class, and this is good. So now I want to pass an instance of this blog post class to my view, but rather than just constructing an object here, I think I'll create a repositories folder, repositories, and in here let's pretend that I'm getting some blog posts from some database here, and I'm wrapping all that logic into one method in our repository. We'll just make it simple. So we'll create this blog repository here. We'll create a constructor for that. Well, actually, we don't need to put anything there. So let's just make a method that returns a blog post, and that is called getBlogPost. And we'll create a new blog post here. In reality, we might go to speak to some database and get the real blog post object, but let's just create one here. So we'll create a new blog post. So let's say the ID is 1, the title is Dynamicweb Rocks, and the content might be, this conference is awesome. It's a good blog post, right? Okay. So we'll return this blog post here, and then from our home controller we'll say that for this controller to work we need a blog repository. Let's just call that repo, and then when this home controller gets constructed, we'll just create a new instance of this repo. So new. Then here we can say we get this blog post from our repository, and then we pass that on to our view. Good. So now the only thing we need to do is to create a view for this whole thing to work. So we create a home folder. I'll then create a MVC view page, and this is empty. Let's just say that this is based on this model that we called blog post, and then let's create some HTML here. I'm not going to use any layout page, but I could have done that. And let's give it a title. Let's just say that the title is the title of this object. Then we'll have a body. So of course you can see by the HTML that I'm writing that this is not really a session on front end, right? But don't worry about that. Okay, good. So now when I run this, we should get a page with the title and with the content of the blog post. Yeah, right? You see, nothing crazy here. MVC is still what we know it as. It's still MVC. But there's some things around it that have changed. Let me just see what I wrote in my demo script here. Okay, yeah. So one of the big things here in ASP.NET is also this idea of dependency injection. Have people heard about dependency injection? Yeah? Okay, I think I'll show what it is. So I sort of did a thing here that's not very good from a testing point of view. So let's say that I wanted to do a lot of unit testing here, which is a good idea, right? I would have a problem with this class because it depends very much on another class. These two classes are very tightly coupled together. A home controller really depends on a blog repository. And if I want to test my home controller, I can't do that without also sort of halfway testing my block repository. That's not a good idea if I want to sort of separate the things out. And if I want to make things more modular, I should really implement what's called dependency injection. So ASP.NET 5 comes with a very basic dependency injection system. You can use your own if you want to. You can use AutoFac or Windsor or Ninject or whatever. You can replace that, but in this simple example, I'll just use the dependency injection system that's built into ASP.NET 5. So what I'll say here is, rather than creating my own object of the block repository here, I'm going to go ahead and create an interface for this. And I'll call that iBlock repository. And I'll say that this interface promises that there will be a get blog post method that returns a string. That's everything. Then I'll say that my blog post repository here actually does implement that. Good. So there's that, and then in here in my home, oh, something was wrong, wasn't it? Good. Ah, very nice. Yeah. Good, 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 good. So of course I should be blog post. That was a mistake. Okay, and then in my home controller, I will say this home controller actually depends on on something that implements the iBlock repository interface. So I'll just say that, and then I'll say, okay, assign this like that. Now, we already in here in our startup. Oh, here it is. We already put this using in here the Microsoft.framework.dependency injection, so we can go ahead and use that, and we have to define that up here in our services method. So here to this services object we can say add, and there are a few different things we can add. The one I'll use here is this add transient, and it has this is where you can specify that whenever there is a class that needs something, that depends on something, you go ahead and give it this object, okay? So here, I'll say whenever there's something that needs an iBlock repository, and I might like this, go ahead and stick it an instance of the block repository. And I need to do this. Okay, good. Now let me just set a few breakpoints so you might get a better idea of how it works. So when this block repository class gets constructed, let's put a breakpoint here, and let's put a breakpoint here, and that's it. Let's try and run this again. So now once again we are hitting the home controller, right? Just like we did before. But before hitting the home controller, we're hitting the constructor of this block repository. If I click continue, the next breakpoint we'll hit is the constructor of the home controller, and we can see here that we got an instance of block repository, and that's totally fine because block repository does indeed implement the iBlock repository interface. Great or not great? Very great. Yes. So this is dependency injection for you. Okay. By default, all these controllers, they inherit from the controller class, but that's actually not strictly necessary. ASP.NET will find all of the controllers that we have based on this convention that controllers must end, or their name must end on controller. That's how it finds them. But it's not needed to inherit from this controller class. It just makes our life a little easier. Now, one of the problems we get by not inheriting from this class is we can't use this function called view because it doesn't exist any longer. But that's actually not a big deal. Let's just create a simple view here. Let's just call this test, and let's just say this is a test view. I could actually just return that straight from my method here, I could say return new view result, and the view name is equal to test. So if I click save here, I think that was maybe a typo. I had a space there where there shouldn't be. Good. Okay. Yeah. So now we should see this test page. Oh, we are getting hit by these again. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. So the reason why I wanted to show this is to really emphasize the point that things are modular here. You're not forced to do anything. You can do whatever you want. We suggest that you inherit from the controller class when you make controllers because it gives you a set of nice features, but you're not forced to do so. That's a big difference from how it used to be. Let's just revert this to what it was before. I'll just press Control C a few times, and there we go. And now the next thing I want to show, let me see what that is. Yeah, I want to run this on something different from the IIS, and that's totally possible with this new world that we're in. So I'm going to go down here to my project.json file again, and I'm going to define some commands, and it'll make sense in just 30 seconds what a command is. So I'll say I have some commands for this project. I'll name my command web, and then I'll say that whenever I call this command, an instance of Microsoft ASPNET hosting should be started. It should start a server called the web listener, and we can copy that in, and it should listen on this URL, which is HTTP localhost, let's say 3003. Now the web listener is a server that sits directly on top of http.sys inside of Windows. So it sits at a much lower level than IIS does, and it's a much more basic server than IIS. We don't get all the nice features that IIS can give us. We just get sort of the raw HTTP server that is actually a lot faster, but it can't give us all the nice features. And what I want to show here is that we can take exactly the same application we've written using and testing with IIS, but now we'll run it on another server. Okay? And the only thing we need to do here is to say we depend now on another dependency, the web listener. We created this command, and this command we can now use from the command line. So let me just navigate into this folder. It should be here. Yep. We'll move into the source folder and then into the project folder. And if I type dir, we can see the contents of my project folder. This shouldn't be any surprise. Now, if I type k space web here, it should start up a server using exactly this command. And this web word here comes exactly from my web word here. It's now started a server on port 3003. So let's try and go into that. And boom, we get exactly the same thing. So it's the same application running on a different server because that other server also implements the OWIN specification. Okay, so that's the contract that's sort of necessary between the server and the application. Now, if we were to, could we do? If we were to add a static file in our root folder here, or in our www root, let's make a static HTML file and then just say I am a static file, and we can say here hello, I am static. Now if I were to go into if I were to request this page, nothing would show up, whereas if I started that up, if I used IIS, let's just see the difference. If I were to go into here, I get actually a static file, okay? So that's IIS doing extra work for us. It's a feature of IIS to handle static files. But the web listener will not do that for us unless we specifically tell it to, and we can do so. And we can do it by saying that we depend on this dependency called static files. We save that. The NuGet package will be downloaded, and then here in our request pipeline, we'll say, okay, we actually want to use static files here. Boom. If I go ahead and fire off the same command, I start up the web listener once again, and it's there. If I go into the same one, I now get the static file. So is it clear that everything is modular here? You add things on top of each other, and if you don't want that stuff, you don't include it. So it's much more lightweight and much more modular. Now I want to do something that's truly awesome, and now I've been talking for about 40 or 45 minutes now, and so this is really the cream, or this is sort of the cherry on my demo. In here, in this wonderful cloud that's called Microsoft Azure, which is, by the way, a lot better than Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud, we can fire up virtual machines, and I have done so. I've started a Linux machine running Ubuntu, and I've opened up a few endpoints. I've opened up the port for SSH, so we can actually go ahead and connect to that using PuTTY. You know PuTTY? Well, yeah. Anyway, we can connect to the command line of this Ubuntu server like this. Let's see, I'm not sure I typed in my password correctly. Let's hope I did. Okay, so it says here, welcome to Ubuntu 14.04.1. So we are inside of the Linux server right now. The only thing I've installed in this server is the Mono runtime environment, or the Mono framework, and also a Git client, so that I can go ahead and clone a repository from Git. So what we can do now is, actually we need to just do one thing. We need to specify here that we also want to support another server, and this server is called Kestrel. This Kestrel server can run on Ubuntu, and then also we want to make a command for firing up a Kestrel server. So let's name this command Kestrel, and instead of firing up a web listener, we'll just fire up a Kestrel server, and let's do that on port, I don't know, 3004. Good. Let's add this to a repository on GitHub so that we can download it on the Ubuntu server. I'll just create a new repository. I'll call it DWTC demo. Good. Great. Now add source control to this project. There's nothing new here. This is how it works in Visual Studio 2013 as well. Let's just say that we want to publish to this remote repository. Great. We then want to commit these changes that we have, and let's just call that initial solution. We'll commit that, and we'll push that up. Oh, not that. Here. We'll push this into our GitHub repository. It successfully pushed this, so in here we should now see all of our files. Come on, internet. Come on, internet. Come on. Stop downloading porn. Well, come on. Yeah, so here we have them, right? It's the same files. So from in here, I can navigate into my projects folder, and I can clone this solution into my Ubuntu server. I'll write git clone, and then the address for this Git repository. It's done, and I can then type ls and see that we have over here our DWTC demo. Let's navigate into that. And we'll navigate into the source folder, and then here, and we have all the same files as we had on Windows. We could see the contents of the project.json, and right here we have that command that we're now about to run. Okay, Before we do that, I want to prepare everything so that when I fire off this command, everybody will start clapping and cheering because it will be so awesome, right? I talked to Nikolai, he's got the fireworks ready. So let's just open up a port here for this server so that we can actually connect to it from the outside. So let's say that we want to open up HTTP. The public port will be 80, but the internal port will be 3004, just like I specified before. So I'll do that, and it takes just a little while. And what fun things could I say in that little while? Maybe I could say a little more about these command line tools. So let's just have this running while we talk about the command line tools. I typed K before, K-Web, and that's because ASP.NET comes with a set of command line tools that all start with the letter K. It's sort of an arbitrary letter. It comes from the project K that deals with this whole thing. And the K command line tools include both the KVM, and I could type KVM list, and this will then show me all the K runtime environments that I have. You should sort of think of this as like if you're familiar with how Node works or Python or Ruby, you can take some, for example, in the world of Python, you can take some Python code and you can run that in the command line by saying Python and space and then the name of the file, right? The same thing with Node. If you've written some JavaScript server, you can write Node space and then the name of that JavaScript file that includes that server. Sort of the same thing here. We just type K and then specify the command that we want to run. We can predefine some commands instead of having to type out the whole thing. Well, now we have set up this endpoint, so we are ready to type in K Kestrel, because that's exactly the command we defined. And when we do this, I think it will actually fail because we need to fire off another command before that, now that I remembered. Now we have these 5 dependencies here, and these were, we got those from the project.json, but this folder does not actually have these NuGet packages as of yet, because the NuGet packages weren't uploaded with our source, right? So we can just type in kpm restore. A KPN stands for the K package manager. It will go up and download all the dependencies it needs. And once that is done, we are ready to fire off the golden command, okay? And so it takes a little while to download, so you can start warming up your hands, because I want to hear some big clapping in a little bit, okay? Come on. Yeah. Come on. Yeah, here we go. So now we can type the K Kestrel command. You ready? Are you ready? Yeah. Good. We fire it off. We started. Let's go into ASP.NET, Ubuntu Cloud App.NET, and it's on port 80, right? And I hit enter. Boom! Yeah, I'm pretty impressed myself as well. Happy it worked. Whew. Okay, so let's just kill this for now. And let's see if there's some other stuff that I would like to show you. We could either talk a little bit about middleware or front end. We have about 7 minutes. What do you want to hear about? Front end? Front end? Yeah? Okay, front end. So it's front end. Let's start up a new project here. This time we'll open up a starter web because it includes a little more files than the empty project does. Well, we'll just do this. So we'll just call this web application 8. And rather than choosing an empty project template, we'll take this starter web. So let's do that and then take a look at what this comes with. So it's creating this project and it's doing weird things to my Visual Studio. It's not responding. What's going on? Well, it's still preview software, right? Hang on a second. It's still working, I think. It's just messing up a little bit. Hang on. The things that I want to show you for front end is, let's see, is specifically Bower and the Grunt Task Runner. So when you create a starter web in here, it includes already a controllers folder, and also a migrations folder for your entity framework migrations, your models, and views. Now it also has a few more folders here. It has this grunt file. Grunt is a task runner that can run tasks for us. That could be Bower. That's what it comes with here by standard. Bower is a package manager for front-end libraries. So traditionally, NuGet also hosted jQuery and Angular and other sorts of front-end libraries. But we're trying to separate that now so that we will use Bower, which has sort of established itself as the standard package manager for front-end libraries. So Grunt can run Bower and download jQuery and Angular and all these other front-end libraries we might need. It can also run other types of tasks. So it can run a JS minifier, for example. So we'll take all of a CSS minifier. So it can take all of our CSS and minify that. And we don't have to worry about that. It will do that automatically. It can also go ahead and check if our JavaScript is okay, and you can do a bunch of things. Let's take a look at the bower.json file here. By default, it says that we need Bootstrap, jQuery, jQuery validation, and jQuery validation unobtrusive here. And when I open up my task runner here, there's this Bower install task, which will then go ahead and download all of these. If I would want another dependency, a front-end dependency here, I could type that in here, and we get full intelligence. So let me give you an example. Earlier today, I had a presentation on TypeScript and Angular. Let's say that I would want to use Angular here. So I can type in Angular, look at the intelligence, say woo. Yeah, good. We can say we need this. It goes and checks. Okay, what kind of versions are actually available here? Oh, we can take this version, for example. When we save that and we run this install task, it will run the task and then download this. So let me try and see if I can. It says here install Bower packages, and it installed them into the www root, because that's our static folder, and then into the lib folder. So we can take a look here, and now we see we have Angular. What? It's crazy, right? What more can it do? Oh, the task runner here, it hooks very nicely into the MS build. So whenever we actually build our solution, we can say we want these tasks to be run. So if we do it like this, we'll say, okay, this Bower install task, do that every time, or actually before every build. We can do that by saying this binding, or actually like this, before build. Okay, good. So every time that I press Control-Shift-B for build, it will actually go ahead and fire off this task before the build process starts. So that's how this thing Grunt, which is not like limited to Visual Studio, how it can actually hook into something that works inside of a Visual Studio. So your development experience using these tools is more coherent. Okay. So ASP.NET is a lot of things, and I think the stuff we talked about for the first 50 minutes is really what the core of it is. But Visual Studio 2015 also comes with a bunch of other things that are really cool for web developers. And I think that this here is a very good example of that. Let me just spend the last minute on wrapping up, if I do have any wrap-up slides. Well, I only have this slide for where to download it. So if you want to get your hands dirty with this, you should go to asp.net/vnext. If you are interested in this type of news, what's happening with ASP.NET 5 and web development tools, and also what's going to happen with Windows 10, which I haven't mentioned today, but it's also a big thing coming up this year, you should sign up to our Danish newsletter. It's at ak.ms/nyhedsbrev, and you need a Windows or Microsoft account to sign up. But it's pretty easy to do that, and we'll send you news as they come directly to your inbox. So that's it, and yeah, any questions? Otherwise we can take them afterwards. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.